Hey guys, welcome to another episode of Careertainment, and my name is Vikram Limsay. And today we will talk about a very interesting topic, learnings from sport. Now I'm quite certain most of you, in fact all of you will agree that sports offers the best examples, little examples that you can pick up and apply them and implement them in your day-to-day life. And why just day-to-day life? Your profession, your business, as leaders of your team, as entrepreneurs, and across the board about mental conditioning, about emotional conditioning, even about physical preparedness. You learn so much. You can pick out little episodes, values, incidents, and apply them, learn from them, and implement them with quite a surefire chance of succeeding, in fact. I love to take out examples out of sport and try to implement them in my own way in my life. And I thought, why not dedicate one episode to this? So in today's episode, we are going to be talking about 11 specific mental learnings, and I mean mental learnings that you can take out of that glorious campaign of the Indian cricket team, which went on to win the World Cup in 2011. It's been a decade. And why it's close to me is because I followed that team right from the league stages into the quarterfinals up to the finals, and the atmosphere was electric. People were just ecstatic, and it was exhilarating everywhere. The crowds were, with it. Remember, it was a flawless performance by the team. There were, I think, around 6 odd league matches, then 1 quarterfinals, 1 semifinals, 1 finals, and India had lost only 1 game, I think, against South Africa. But otherwise, it was a flawless performance, and the crowds along with the team was ecstatic. But of course, we had a ringside view. We saw what was happening from outside, from the stadiums, from the stands. But what must be really happening inside the minds of the cricketers? Wouldn't it be great to know that? And that's the reason why I'm talking about this specific episode today. Because recently, it was the 10th anniversary, almost a decade has passed, and I came across a super article by Paddy Upton, I think on the internet. Paddy Upton was the mental conditioning coach of the Indian cricket team during the World Cup, 2011 World Cup. Gary Kirsten was, of course, the head coach, and Paddy Upton was the mental conditioning coach. And I came across this article. It is a fantastic article. I urge you all to kind of Google and read it, and you can take your own learnings out of it. I read it, and it was so amazing. I could take out specific 10 or 11 mental learnings that I thought I'll share with you. But I still urge you, read it yourselves and take out your own learnings. Now, Paddy Upton had a ringside view of what was happening inside the minds of each of these cricketers and through the game. And he's written about that. And he's traced it from before the World Cup started in the planning stages on to the finals. And he's narrated incidents from which you can take out so many learnings. And that's what I think I'll talk about. So let's begin. So the first one I begin in which Paddy Upton talks about the campaign 10 months before the World Cup actually started. This was during the Asia Cup final in Sri Lanka, which incidentally India won again against Sri Lanka. And even before that, India had a winning streak. But the head coach, Gary Kirsten, and Paddy Upton sat together and they said, let's discuss dispassionately that if the World Cup starts today, do we have a chance? Are we mentally prepared to win the cup? And they went through rounds of discussion and dispassionate discussion and came to a conclusion saying that no, the team was not in a shape at that point of time, if the World Cup were to happen then, to win it. And they analyzed and found out that there were 2 reasons. One, history was against them because it was a history that no team had won the World Cup on home turf. That was point number 1. And the reason they said perhaps was because there was so much home pressure, the home crowd pressure. And especially the subcontinent, where I think you and I will understand, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, where the crowd pressure is huge. So it made it all the more difficult for the Indian cricket team to win it if it was that day. So they made a dispassionate analysis, and that was, to my view, the first learning that I took out. Do a dispassionate, unemotional analysis of your current scenario, regardless of your victories of the past or immediate past. And that's what I think we should do even for business, for our campaigns, for new projects that we're going to be implementing. Do a dispassionate, unemotional analysis of your scenario. That was the first learning that I had. The next one, he goes on to then talk about, once he'd done that analysis, they talk about, starting to put in place certain mental strategic roadmap. And he goes on to talk about the first match against Bangladesh. Now, the first match, as all of us would understand, is a game that is a lot of nervous game, because you have to shake off such a huge campaign. And of course, who better than Sehwag, who came, and I'm reading his match report, who better than Sehwag, who slammed 175 in that run to shake off those initial nerves. But regardless of how Sehwag played or whatever the nerves were there, Paddy Upton and Gary Kirsten had decided that the whole strategy was to depressurize the team. So their larger blocks of strategy were in place. And how were they going to do that? By doing two things. One, they were never going to talk about in terms of winning or losing. And they were never going to talk about it, give a pressure each time at every stage of the entire campaign. It was a long campaign, mind you. So there was no point about talking, hey, we won this, let's move to the next one. No, it was never about that. The verbal communication and how they talked occupied a large part of that strategy. So the strategic block was to always focus on the process and not on the end result. They were never going to talk about wins, but they were going to talk about playing the best cricket as much as anybody could. And the other thing Paddy Upton writes over there, they were talking in terms of, whenever we are going to be playing that final, we'll play our best game. Whenever we're going to be playing our final, we're going to be playing our best game. So subliminally, they were ingraining in the minds of all the team members that the road to the final was clear, but it was not about individual games. It was about the larger process. So the second learning, mental learning, that I draw out of what Paddy Upton has written about that Bangladesh game was put in place a key mental frame-up strategy. Once you've decided, dispassionately analyzed, the second one is to put in place a key mental makeup strategy in place, which was about talking about the process and not about the wins. Then the team goes on to the next game, which was the England game. And this was an important game. Although India had a great record against England, they had won almost 10 matches on the home turf against them. But this England was a great team. And sure enough, this was an exhilarating match, which some of us who've seen that match, it was tied, by the way. England needed some 4 runs of 2 balls, and it was all down to the last over with Munaf Patel. And Munaf, they say, is one of the most underrated cricketer, but that apart, what Paddy Upton talks about Munaf, he says that when he was working with Munaf, he found out that this guy had very humble beginnings. And he came from a small village in Gujarat, and the family was hard up on money, and the family was against him playing cricket. He couldn't even afford a pair of shoes, but then still, thanks to Kiran More and Sachin Tendulkar, they egged him on to become a cricketer, and then the rest is history. But all this coming up from hard times and coming up to the highest stage in the game made this guy very driven, as I'm sure most of us will understand. Those of who come from very hard background are very driven and aggressive. So Munaf Patel's aggression is what Paddy Upton saw, and said that if I worked with him, I saw that if he was less aggressive, he just left the pieces hanging. If he was over aggressive, he spoiled it for himself. And Munaf is known for that, right? But if the aggression was just the right manner, just the right quantity, then he performed the best. And that's what Paddy Upton got out of him by talking about it, by understanding his childhood and being aware of where he came from and empathizing with him. And that's my third learning out of this brilliant England-tied game, which was understand the personal mental makeup of each member of your team. Be aware of that and empathize with him. You never know what's the kind of performance you'll bring out. That's the third lesson. Then Paddy Upton talks about the next game, which was a match against Ireland, which is a fairly straightforward, simple game where Yuvraj came and slammed 100, I think a big number over there, and it was more of a loosener. But what Paddy Upton says that after the game, the post-game match, everybody discussed, and he says the learnings that I got out of that match, or he got out of that match, which I'm kind of replicating over here, is that easy or difficult, whatever is the situation, stay focused on the process or the larger strategy that you have decided. And the larger strategy was to depressurize, not focus on the wins or losses, but be focused on playing the great game, be focused on the process. So whether it's a strong opposition or a weak opposition, stay focused on your overall strategy is what the learning I got out of what Paddy Upton's article was there. The next game was an easy game against the Minnows, against Netherlands. Now, the Netherlands team was an underdog. They had no pressure, like I'm sure all of you will know. An underdog team has no pressure, whereas a team like India, when playing against them, has huge pressure. And sure enough, the unthinkable, or what people were not thinking about, happened. The entire, I think it was 180 odd runs that they made, and the entire middle order of the Indian cricket team collapsed. Of course, Yuvraj came and kind of sorted out at the end of the day. But what Paddy Upton writes about that particular game against Netherlands is that he says that at any point of time, only 30 to 35% of your team is going to perform your best. And I think that's what happens even in business, right? But you need to quickly identify which 30% is actually performing. Even don't get upset if your top performance or the rest of the 70 is not performing. Let them just go and back up the 30% who are performing on that day. Right? And that's a great learning. So don't depend on everybody. Understand that only 20, 30, 35% of any team will perform in any campaign. That was the learning from that game against Netherlands. The next game was an amazing learning which he talks about, which was against South Africa. And this was the game that India lost. This was the only game that India lost. And what he writes about that game was the post-match scenario, the post-match meeting, where he says that India was blessed to have a coach in Gary Kirsten and Mahendra Singh Dhoni as a captain, who were on a completely even keel as far as the emotion was concerned. So they were so focused on having an emotional balance that they just took it in their stride, saying that we are focusing on the process. We are not going to be too concerned about this loss or the wins earlier or what we are going to play through to the finals. So my learning from what that article of that particular match was that when the even keel leadership exists, then the team is also even keel. So it's very important in any business campaign also, all of us, to keep our leadership at an even keel in terms of emotion and not be reactive or aggressive or otherwise from time to time. Keep an even keel, and then even the team remains emotionally stable, and that gives the best result. Then we move on to the next match, which was against West Indies. And what he says was that this was a clinical match. The first time India just bowled out West Indies, bundled them out. They made a great score. Sachin did a great job. So the learning from the match against West Indies, according to Paddy Upton, was that there was this sense of faith to succeed. And that's very important. And certain matches or certain incidents or certain stages in any campaign that you undertake, either in sports or business, allows you to get that confidence and manifest that faith or that sense of victory that we are going to make it. And he could see that at that particular point of time. The next game was against Australia. And this was, the quarterfinal game. And again, one of the strongest teams in the world. And what he says was that at this point of time, not everybody performed, but a guy like Suresh Raina did a great job. So the learning from the Australia team, according to Gary Upton, was that we are always focused on the flamboyant, aggressive, showcase members of the team, but often forget the introvert guys. Suresh Raina was the introvert package. So remember, in your team, there are these introverted guys who will never step out and come out to the fore, but that does not mean that they are not a part of the, they're not going to be contributing when the time comes. And be focused on the introvert guys. They could be your match winners in critical moments. In fact, Paddy Upton goes on to talk even about how Gary Kirsten talks about Gautam Gambhir. Like how Rahul Dravid was the wall in our test team, he says Gautam Gambhir was actually the rock in the Indian team, but he was not the flamboyant type. He's well, Viren Sehwag did all the flamboyant shooting, and UV did. These guys just knocked a single here and a two there, once in a while a four. But they were the glues. So the introvert. Don't forget the introverts in the team. So that was the learning from the Australia game that he takes out. And then there was this very important game with Pakistan about semi-finals. Now this was really critical, and he writes an incident that none of us, at least I wasn't aware of. It so happened that there was the Taj hotel bombing just before that, and of course we know the entire story about the involvement of terrorists and terrorist strikes and everything. But what Paddy Upton says is that the team was so cued on to this match against Pakistan is that because the match winner was going to stay in the Taj hotel during the finals, which was the next stage. And the entire team was having a single-minded objective that they got to win this match, because there was no way they could allow Pakistan to go and stay in the same hotel where this incident of the bombing had happened. So the learning from that match, which I took out, was that, which I have mentioned even in my earlier episode, that there has to be a larger objective than the game for everybody. And this was the larger objective. Sachin Tendulkar, the god of cricket, also knew about it. He never talks about it, but he came to the party in that match. And he said, and the way his performance was, it ensured that Pakistan was beaten, and it was not going to stay at the Taj Mahal hotel during the finals, and it was India which was going to be staying there. So the learning from that game, always keep a larger objective in mind, which is way beyond the immediate, even beyond the process of winning, losing, or otherwise. Even beyond the objective of the game, there's a larger objective that one is playing for. And that's what even happens in business. I've covered that in certain other episodes. And then, of course, the final match with Sri Lanka. That game, I remember, it was just amazing. But when Paddy Upton writes, he says that if I were able to take out the exhilaration and bottle it in a bottle and give it to everybody, he would be a rich man. But there's a critical learning or episode that he relates about the final, which is a great learning for all of us in business, in life, in professions. He says, I think most of us who are old enough will remember that Mahendra Singh Dhoni upgraded himself in the batting order when there was a kind of a minor collapse on the top, and we were all in the stadium wondering what's happening. It was a nail-biting kind of a finish, or rather situation. And out of nowhere, Dhoni walked in, and nobody was expecting him to walk in for batting. And what Paddy Upton says that Dhoni normally doesn't sit in the crowd. He's inside in the changing room, and when he saw the wicket go and it was time for Yuvraj to enter for batting, he just gave a small knock on the mirror or the glass partition between him and Gary Kirsten, and said that I'm going. Gary Kirsten did not even question him. There was no discussion. There was complete faith between the coach and the captain. And he said, all right. Now the reason what Paddy Upton says is that here was a captain or a leader who was absolutely clear about his own strengths. He knew that he was the match winner. He was the best pressure player in the world. Yuvraj was a flamboyant player, a great player, of course, but he was not a pressure player. Dhoni knew that about himself, and that is one of the greatest learning Paddy Upton says he had from that game, the final game with Sri Lanka. That if the leader is very clear about his own strength, nothing can beat the team. And Dhoni walked out and stayed till the end, and then we all know that final helicopter shot with which the World Cup was won. It was amazing. So that was the learning out of the final. And then Paddy Upton goes on to even narrate the story after the match. Because after the World Cup, which India won, they had a 1 year period in which there was the most forgettable campaigns they did. The team just slumped. And that's the learning that Paddy Upton says he can pick out of the mountaineering. It is said that almost 70 or 80% of the mountaineers who attempt a peak like the Everest or somewhere else die on the way down after they have achieved. And that's exactly what happened to the Indian cricket team. For all their planning, even the head coach and the captain and Paddy Upton himself, they said, we had not planned, and that was a mistake, we had not planned for after the game. So he says, that's a learning for me, because the planning, the mental conditioning does not stop. Like it starts before the objective or the game, it should not stop after the objective is met, and you need to plan even afterwards. So it was an amazing article. These are the 11 learnings that I got. Let me summarize them for us over here. First, evaluate the scenario dispassionately. Second, put in place the larger blocks of your mental strategy, which means in this case, depressurize. Don't talk about the wins or losses, talk about the process. The third one is understand the personal mental makeup of each member of your team. You never know who's going to be making you win that game. Fourth, easy or difficult, do not take any opposition lightly, like in case of Ireland or Netherlands, but be always focused on the process. Not that because a loose team, let's leave the process behind and play what we want. Don't do that. Point number 5, it could be anybody's day on that day. 20 or 30, it's the rule that 30% of your team will perform. You need to identify which 30% is performing on that particular day, and the rest of the 70 have to look back and support that 30%. Point number 6, most important, an even keel, stable emotional leadership leads to an even keel, stable emotional team in any campaign, whether a game or a business. 7, identify moments which manifest your faith to succeed. There are many. The match against West Indies in this campaign was that. Number 8, like Gautam Gambhir, like Suresh Raina, in your own team, do not ignore the introverts. You never know their strengths. They are the glue. Gautam Gambhir was the rock who glued the team, who was the glue inside the team. So don't blindside the guys who are introverts and focus only on the flamboyant guys. And 9, always be aware of the larger objective. India could not afford to let Pakistan stay in the Taj Mahal hotel. So that was the larger objective, way beyond the game. It was a national objective. Number 10, the leader, Dhoni's quality. Leader should be absolutely clear about his team's strength, but more importantly about his own strengths and what he's ready to deliver. That was the 10. And the last one is, do not forget to plan for your emotional or mental makeup after the objective is won, so that you're better prepared for your next campaign. So these were the 11 learnings that I had. Longish video, but then of course there were more than 9 games, or almost 9 games, so I thought the learnings were great. I hope you liked the video. Keep watching, subscribe to the channel, share with everybody, and keep connecting. Bye for now. Take care.